Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saranang gacchami, Dhammāṃ saranang gacchami, Sanghaṃ saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi Dhammāṃ saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchami, Tatiyampi Dhammāṃ saranang gacchami, Tatiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchami. So, welcome everybody to our Tuesday meditation. Nice to see everybody after the break. I was away last week, and much gratitude to Venerable Triratana, our senior monk, for taking over the meditation class. Hope we get to hear more of his Dhamma talks in the future. And last week was a kind of very nice week. There was a senior monk in town, and there's kind of this tradition among monks they call kind of I think it's called the upathak. I can't remember the Pali word. The Thai word is upathak, and it's based on a Pali word, so somebody here might know the actual Pali word. And friends of mine who actually kind of randomly met years ago and kind of reconnected with a few years ago and came back to the city, they organized for a teacher to come over. And I was very lucky because I got to stay and help take care of the monk who was there, this kind of duty called upathaking. And it's kind of a very special opportunity for me. There's some of these monks who you really revere. If you go to their monasteries, there's a lot of monks there. So it's like kind of, if you go anywhere with them, then usually there's a whole bunch of people going, But this time I was actually very lucky because I was the only one there with this monk who I really revere. So it was a wonderful opportunity for me. And one of the things about this kind of upathaking is kind of one of the basic ways that you train as a monk. People think, oftentimes you think, what are monks up to? What do you do when you're training as a monk? And you think a monk's kind of like in the Himalayas meditating. Monks do that, or kind of, in a cave meditating. And that's true. Monks do that. That's something you do. But actually one of the most basic elements of a monk's training is actually learning to take care of the senior monks. Kind of something you wouldn't expect. This is kind of one of the basic things. It's not just big, you keep doing it, you kind of never stop taking care of the senior monks and doing things like cleaning toilets, cleaning floors, wiping counters. All these things are kind of very basic and very important elements of a monastic life. And it seems like there's something which is kind of totally unrelated to meditation. But especially if you have a very kind of skilled teacher. This kind of monk the monk who I was staying with, I stayed with him a couple of times before and have kind of tremendous amount of respect for him. And being around a kind of monk who's a very skilled teacher, they're like being around like a really skilled judo teacher. In other words, when I was young, I used to take judo, and it was like maybe grade 3, and you'd be there with the judo teacher, and you'd be like, okay, put your hands like this. You put your hands on the guy's gi. Be like, okay, put your hip in this position if you want to throw me. And if you put it in the wrong position, he's much bigger than you. He can stop you from throwing. The judo teacher could stop you from throwing him at any time. But if you put your hips in the right position, he'll let you execute the throw. If you don't, he won't. In other words, that judo teacher, if you're ever sparring with somebody who's really good, it's not really a good analogy because, of course, teachers aren't trying to beat you up. But, a kind of teaching situation, you ever kind of trying to teach somebody in like a judo or some physical skill, that teacher is in almost complete control of the situation at all times. And you just get like a sense that they are. So if you do something wrong, sometimes as an upathak, you're supposed to, they have this tradition where they call it think like a thief. There's one teacher, he said when he first went to stay with his teacher, he said, okay, you can stay here, but you have to learn to think like a thief. In other words, what that means is that the teacher doesn't tell you what to do. you have to figure out what to do on your own. In other words, you have to kind of learn to use this faculty that notices things. What's going on? What does he need right now? What does he want right now? And sometimes they would kind of drop hints. So there was a retreat day with this teacher, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. He went over and opened one blind, like a blind like this. And I was like, okay, what's he opening that blind for? So I went and opened the second one and didn't know what was going on. And then we were sitting there in this retreat, and it kept getting hotter and hotter. And I was thinking to myself, I wonder if I should ask one of the monks if I can turn the temperature down. Maybe the people need the temperature turned down. But then I forgot about it, just kind of totally left my mind. And he went away and took a rest and came back. And right when we came back into the retreat hall, instead of going to his seat, he walked over in front of everybody and started opening all the blinds. And I was like, uh-oh, I missed a cue. So I went and opened like 2 or 3 on my side. And then within like 10, 15 minutes, the room cooled down to a kind of reasonable temperature. So I was thinking, okay, that was something that I missed. And then there was this other time that I was kind of trying to get the bowls prepared. Like, okay, I got to get the bowls. And you have to remember these different things. Like, okay, he needs spoons. We're going to need hand sanitizer. And then each place you go to is different. And then you take care of their sitting cloth. They have different various cloths that they use at the mealtime, and their bowl. And their bowl has all these various traditions around it. Like, you can't just put it down on things. It has to be very carefully cared for. So I was kind of there and getting all the seats set up. I was like, okay, I've got everything. Everything's in place. We've got it all here. And I was looking around, and he'd just gone out to break for a bit. And then I turned around and I was like, oh my God, I forgot the bowls. And then I saw him coming with his bowl. And I was like, oh, I forgot. But, that day he was, that situation, he was kind of very kind. He just acted like nothing happened. I was like, I forgot the bowls. He was like, no problem. He didn't really say that, just kind of smiled. But then there were other times during the trip that he was there when, of course, you're taking care of somebody all the time. Your attitude, you can't really just, unless you're really skilled, you're just not always in total control of your mind all the time. It's kind of, you can rush, your thoughts kind of rush here and there sometimes, like, okay, thinking this or that. And there were a couple times, always trying to do these things, but then there's a couple of times where, sometimes you develop a kind of wrong attitude. Not like a blatant one, not like a blatantly wrong attitude, but very skilled teachers just pick up on that immediately. Almost as soon as the thought crosses your mind, it's like somehow they know that the thought has crossed your mind, and then you get kind of like a hammer. The bowls was like a relatively, that's my job, is to have the bowl, but it didn't really get a big thing. But a couple of times, kind of maybe like I remember, maybe asking some questions or like inserting some jokes where I shouldn't have. And like it was just kind of this silence, kind of everything fell silent after that. And then I realized, okay, that wasn't the right time to be telling a joke. What's my role here? I shouldn't be telling jokes. This is a time for him to interact with the lay people. So notice I kept, whenever I kind of, throw in a comment or something like that, it kind of, the room turned a little colder. And I realized, okay, finally I figured out, okay, what he's trying to tell me is, my role here is to stay quiet, and his role is to be interacting with the people who come to see him. Not me, it's his role, And so after I figured that out, then everything went smoothly in that area. But one of the things that this kind of training teaches you is, number one, you develop a lot of kind of reverence for the person who you're taking care of, because it becomes obvious to you very quickly, if you ever stay with a skilled teacher, that they know an immense amount more than you. You can't kind of measure, how much more they know than you. It's kind of, there's this thing in the canon where they say that if you're skillful and somebody's unskillful, the skillful person can know how unskillful the unskillful person is. But if somebody's unskillful, they don't know how much more skillful the person who's more skillful than them is. If you're a kind of really expert judo master, then you get a sense, where everybody in the class is. Your skills are much higher than theirs. But if you're kind of like even a brown belt or whatever belt you are, maybe you've been doing judo for some years, still you don't know, what the skills of the judo master are. You have no clue. You just know that if you spar with him, you end up on the mat. That's how it is. But having this kind of sense of reverence for a person who's able to teach you and instruct you in this way is something that's very uplifting for a person's mind. It's kind of a very good thing to have, which is why kind of many people, their first recommendation is to try to find kind of a good teacher, if you can. Try to look for one if you can, or find one. It's because there's this kind of aspect to our faith, and they call this saddha, that isn't just rooted in books, isn't just rooted in kind of thinking about things and coming to an agreement through pondering them. It actually arises from hanging around people who you feel have genuinely developed in the Dhamma. So they're not just kind of proponents of the words of the Buddha. These are people who are living examples of the Buddha's teachings and living examples of what it's possible to achieve in the Buddha's teachings. And this is one of the true meanings of the refuge of a Sangha jewel. You see this jewel-like quality of the Sangha. And I remember before I went to Thailand, I went to Thailand many years ago now, maybe 5 years ago, but it left a really lasting and strong impression on my mind. There was a monk who came back and he was talking about all these ajahns who are teachers. Ajahn means teacher. And he'd be talking about them and he'd be so full of faith, like he'd have all this faith. And I'd be like, well, I don't know how I'm going to make it in Thailand. I don't really have kind of that much faith. I don't get kind of all gushy like that, But I was there for a year and I came back the same. In other words, these are things that we kind of have to experience for ourselves. There's a lot more to the possibilities in the Buddha's teachings than we realize. Kind of a lot more to our capabilities than we realize. And there's a lot more to the Sangha, a lot more to the living tradition of Buddhism that still exists than we can directly realize unless we spend a lot of time around people like that. People who are living examples of what's possible in the Buddha's teaching. But one of the benefits of spending time around people like this is, like I said, it brings up this sense of faith. It's like this person, sometimes they might be hard on me. One of the things, being a monk is not like you always get spoken to in a pleasant way. Sometimes if you're with a teacher, some will just like ignore you, and speak to you in a harsh way. There's one actually, this particular monk who had the good opportunity to stay with. He said his teacher never complimented him. Stayed with him for 20 years. And he only insulted him. Not like, you're stupid, but, he only pointed out his flaws. The point where other people in the monastery felt kind of sorry for him. But one of the things is that when one of these teachers, they know that you can advance, then they'll start to be hard on you. And one of the interesting things, you don't always get spoken to in this very friendly tone. And you kind of feel a little bit happier when they get harder on you because you realize, okay, well, that means they think I can take it, They think I'm capable of altering my behavior when they point it out to me. And this is one of the things, if we aren't used to receiving criticism from somebody, then it's very difficult to change our behavior. It's very difficult for these things to happen. So these things haven't really penetrated into the general Buddhist, I would say general Buddhist culture. Of course, not going to come here. I'm going to start, scolding anybody here, so don't worry. You're safe, on safe terms here. But this is one of the things as a monk, when people start to do this to you, you actually see sometimes it's not always fun, but when you leave that person's presence, you're like, geez, this person actually pointed out to me a whole bunch of things which were really valuable that I wouldn't have seen. And I would have had to be forced to do this. Kind of just living in this situation with them all the time. It's kind of very tight, can feel tight. They stop you from doing various bad things that you would have otherwise done. And sometimes you leave them, leave the presence. You're not always around people who are your teacher. And you're like, well, whatever, I'm going to do that. I'm not around them, I'm doing it, And you go ahead and do that and you get in big trouble. And that's when you realize, look, they were trying to point out an important lesson to me. Yeah. But all this is to say is that when you have this kind of feeling, like, look, here's a person, these people are really out for my welfare. They're really out to do good things for me. They really care about my well-being, care about how I do in the practice of the Dhamma. Then this feeling of faith arises in them. It's kind of this feeling of happiness. So actually it was amazing. After we left this teacher, there was a group of us, the group who organized his visit, they were coming like every day to serve morning and evening meals, and they were asking all these questions. Some of them were really interesting and advanced questions about meditation. You know, sometimes he'd talk about his experiences in Thailand. And after they left, you know, he left and, you know, got on his plane and flew back, and we were all in the car. And then we started talking a bit, and I was like, you know, so how's everybody doing? And, you know, nobody was able to really say much, you know. It's kind of, you know, they're like, I've got a lot to process, you know. Kind of felt this kind of emotionally moved by having been around for so long. And, you know, I could see that, you know, for myself too, after he left. It's kind of been a few days now. It's kind of thinking back, okay, well, yeah, wait a minute, that was what he was trying to show me in this situation. That was what he was trying to show me in that situation. And this kind of feeling of joy arises. This kind of joy comes from faith. This kind of joy is something that carries over when we sit down in our meditation practice, because without this kind of joy, without this kind of faith in the Dhamma, faith in where goodness can take us, faith in where goodness can take people, is always just a skepticism in our mind. Anything, even a good quality that gets presented to us, a good opportunity that gets presented to us, we can see it as a bad thing. It's like, okay, well, unless this thing leaps me up and smacks me in the face with something really good, I'm not going to believe it, you know? But many of the potentials in our mind, many of the potentials for happiness in our mind actually start out small. You know? They start out as these kind of small seeds. And when we water them, they grow. One of the main ingredients these seeds require is this sense of faith. It's not this kind of complete, credulous, whatever somebody tells me, I'm going to believe them. It starts with a little discernment, but it actually has this kind of feeling, look, there's these genuinely good things that can come from this practice. There's genuinely good people, and there's genuinely good things that I can realize. When this kind of thing happens, and one has a sense of joy arise in one's mind, this feeling like, no, there's good in this. There's more that I can do in this. My mind can go further in this. And that sense of joy carries over. When one sits down to meditate, it's still there. This is why they call it, when we practice meditation, the settling down of the mind. It settles down. But also, it doesn't just settle down. When we have this sense of faith, through our practice, through this cultivation, through learning to tamper down our thinking process, and use more of these heart qualities, these qualities that we don't necessarily get taught in school, but can be grown. And these qualities of faith, this quality of belief in goodness, this quality of generosity, these qualities of kindness. These qualities of the heart are qualities that don't necessarily associate with this active thinking faculty that much. When we cultivate these qualities more and more, that's where this sense of happiness in our daily life comes from. It doesn't necessarily come from making that big achievement, getting that big promotion. When these basic good human qualities become a part of our life, when they become a foundation of our life, then the level of our happiness starts to rise. And this was one of the interesting things that came out of the conversation. Many of the lay people came. That's one of the benefits of being with a teacher like this, is that lay people come and they ask him questions, and you get to hear his answers. So it was very neat. Some people all these people have really different questions. And one of the points that he made was, as you come to practice the Dhamma, if you keep advancing in it, these kind of things aren't necessarily like things you're going to notice like a lightning bolt every time you meditate. It's more like wearing away an adze handle. And kind of these carpenters, they have these kind of handles, on their wooden handle on their adze. And you just imagine this carpenter is chopping away with their adze day after day, day after day, day after day. And little by little, that handle is getting worn down. So they don't know, yesterday the handle wore down this much, today it wore down this much. At the end of a month, this handle will be completely worn through, but the day comes when they see their fingerprints on this kind of adze handle. And they know. And when you see your finger or your grip, your hand grip on the adze handle, you know that it's there. And they keep working with this adze handle. The day comes when it's completely worn through. And when it's completely worn through, they know that it's completely worn through. And in the same way, when day after day we take up these practices, learning to be moral people, every time there's an opportunity to lie for some quick benefit, there's an opportunity to steal for some quick benefit, there's some kind of innocuous occasion where we could take alcohol, could take drugs, we don't take it. That's like wearing this adze handle away bit by bit. It steadily wears away. And one of the interesting things that this teacher said was, as this happens, what actually happens is that a person's level of happiness in their daily life gets raised. It just gets raised bit by bit by bit by bit, until their basic level is actually higher than it was, much higher than it was before. So this is one of the things that he said, when people have their first kind of taste, their first experience of kind of pleasant feelings arising in their meditation, it's this big experience. But gradually, as they continue to practice more and more, it's because it's a big experience in contrast with what they were experiencing before. But as they continue to practice more and more, this just becomes the base level of their mind. Actually, a friend of mine sent me this kind of new scientific research. They wrote a book, this fellow Daniel Goleman, who wrote, I think he was the first guy to talk about, emotional intelligence. He was doing research with this famous scientist who's been studying a lot of meditators. And what they found from these famous meditators, mainly in Tibet and Nepal, was that there's this reaction. I can't remember what kind of wave it was called now, but when you bite into an apple, your brain gets this kind of spike, or you have some crazy experience. These kind of meditators, their brain was always like that, all the time. Okay? Not like they were always biting into an apple. But their basic level of happiness gets raised to this level through the cultivation of these wholesome qualities. When this kind of thing happens, when we develop these wholesome qualities, develop faith in this goodness, faith that there are members of the Sangha who are actually living representations of the Buddha's teachings, faith in our own ability to progress in the practice, these kind of things build up bit by bit. And then when we sit down to meditate, our mind doesn't rush out to thinking, doesn't rush out to this or that achievement. It settles down with these good qualities, just settles. Like the kind of, like if you were to put a bunch of sand and spin it up in a glass, gradually the sand settles down. But the interesting thing about that settling is that the sand doesn't just stay settled down. This kind of feeling of happiness, wells up. This feeling of bliss kind of wells up in a person's mind. This kind of feeling of bliss, this gives a basis for us to practice. It gives a basis for our mind to stay. And it kind of becomes, we can cultivate it to the point where we can achieve that whenever we want. And when we do that, then we have a kind of an alternative to the various sensual pleasures that our mind rushes out to again and again, causes trouble again and again. Rushing out to the next achievement, the next car, the next house, the next, maybe some people rush out to relationships, whatever it is. Rushing out to these things, there's no need to rush out when all that we need, when the things that we need are right here inside. Kind of learn to cultivate more of a refuge like this inside. But this kind of refuge, it isn't just done alone through this kind of thinking faculty. Just thinking about things, waiting for big things to leap up, and say, look at me, I'm bliss. Look at me, I'm happiness. Here it is, I sat down and it was right there first time. It's more like this kind of gradual wearing through of this adze handle. Gradual wearing through of these unwholesome qualities. And the gradual development of these good qualities. These qualities like faith, which are aided, if we can find them, by members of the Sangha, kind of the living members of the Sangha who are our refuge, kind of Sangha jewel. It's aided by observing, the small seeds of goodness that we cultivate in our own minds. And it becomes a thing that we don't have to go around asking anybody else about when we experience it for ourselves. When we see these kind of fingerprints on the handle of the adze, that's when we know, it's harder to convince us otherwise, that the Buddha's teaching is well taught, that it leads to a good place, that it's good in the middle, good in the beginning, good in the middle, and that it ends in a happiness that doesn't change. And that's the whole goal of our practice.